Did Prince Harry plan it all along? Did every shocking interview, every Netflix reveal, every tearful confession in front of the world have a carefully laid blueprint behind it? You might think this was fallout, an impulsive reaction from a wounded royal, but the truth is far more chilling, far more calculated. Princess Anne, the Queen's daughter known for her unflinching honesty and her unwavering dedication to the crown, has just broken her silence. And what she has revealed will shock everyone. Harry was leaking details about William and the palace long before the Oprah interview aired. Months, even years of strategic planning, disguised as emotional vulnerability, were hiding in plain sight. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine the scene. The palace corridors whispering with tension, portraits of past monarchs silently observing the unfolding drama, and Anne, calm, composed, and piercingly direct, holding pieces of evidence that no one else knew existed. Letters, private notes, and insider testimonies that reveal a calculated, premeditated plan that some would call betrayal, others would call strategy. The very thought that Harry might have manipulated the world stage to tell his story while keeping secrets from his own family is enough to make your head spin. And yet, this is the story that Princess Anne is finally telling. You might ask, why now? Why has Anne, the royal known for her discretion and her no-nonsense approach, decided to speak out after years of silence? The answer lies in timing and context. The Netflix deal, the Oprah interview, the explosive headlines, each was carefully orchestrated to paint a narrative that would serve Harry and Meghan's interests. But behind the cameras, behind the public eye, and discovered patterns that revealed intent. This wasn't spontaneous heartbreak, nor was it reactionary drama. This was a strategy executed with precision. And the consequences? Nothing short of seismic for the royal family. Anne's revelation comes at a time when the monarchy is navigating not only public scrutiny, but internal turbulence. The world has seen Meghan and Harry as the rebellious outsiders, the couple willing to defy centuries of tradition to tell their story on their terms. But what if the story we have been fed, tearful moments, candid interviews, public apologies, is only a fragment of the truth? What if the leaks, the careful timing, the preparation for public sympathy were all pieces of a larger puzzle that only and has now revealed? The implications are enormous, not just for Harry and Meghan, but for the entire structure of the royal family, the perception of monarchy in the modern age, and the delicate balance between personal freedom and familial duty. The evidence and has come forward with paints a vivid picture of meticulous planning. The timeline shows Harry reaching out to select insiders, testing narratives, and subtly planting information that would eventually feed into media coverage. Every public outburst, every revealing quote, every staged emotional moment aligns with a strategy that had been in motion long before Oprah's cameras ever rolled. And, with her sharp eye and unparalleled attention to detail, pieced it together. The private conversations, the off-the-record meetings, and even hints dropped during casual encounters that, to the untrained eye, would seem innocuous. But together, they form a narrative that exposes premeditation at its finest. And then there's the human element. Anne's emotional journey is part of this story. She is a woman of action, not speculation. Yet as she reviewed the evidence, she felt a mixture of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. The betrayal isn't just public, it's personal. How does a sibling manipulate circumstances, exploit trust, and play the world stage while keeping secrets from the family who has loved them unconditionally? The emotional stakes are immense. And silence was not ignorance. It was strategy, patience, and careful observation. She waited, she watched, she documented. And now, she speaks. Think about what this means for Harry and Meghan. The couple who have positioned themselves as victims of an unyielding institution were, perhaps, strategic architects of their own narrative. The so-called fallout. The public outrage, the media frenzy, the royal rebuke, may have been part of a larger plan, calculated for maximum impact. And this raises uncomfortable questions. Did Harry truly seek reconciliation, or was he orchestrating a rupture? Did Meghan knowingly play a part in this premeditated plan, or was she swept into the current of Harry's carefully planned actions? Princess Anne's revelations force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the Sussexes and their journey. Now, let's step back and consider the bigger picture. The palace, steeped in centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and discretion, is facing a modern challenge, a challenge of transparency, media influence, and personal ambition. Anne's disclosure does not merely unveil personal secrets. It exposes a strategic game that intersects with global media, public perception, and historical legacy. Every letter, every whisper, every subtle nudge revealed by and is a testament to the lengths to which one could go to control a narrative. It is a masterclass in modern strategy, and it has left the palace reeling. The stakes have never been higher. Public opinion is fickle, media narratives are powerful, and the royal family's image is at risk. And, who has always been a stabilizing force within the monarchy, now finds herself revealing a truth that challenges the very foundation of familial loyalty. The tension between the sisters and brothers, the quiet suspicions, the subtle warnings, all come into sharp focus under the light of Anne's revelations. The question on everyone's lips is simple yet haunting. If Harry was planning this all along, what else remains hidden from public view? What are the consequences for the monarchy, for the Sussexes, and for the trust that binds a family together? And yet, in the midst of this revelation, there is a strange irony. The very act of revealing these secrets is itself a gamble, and knows the repercussions, the media scrutiny, the public backlash, the impact on family relations. But she also understands that truth, once uncovered, cannot be ignored. The strategic leaks, the premeditated narrative, the careful orchestration, these cannot be denied once the evidence is presented. Anne's courage in stepping forward to speak truth to power is emblematic of her character. Direct, uncompromising, and unwavering. She is not merely exposing Harry's actions. She is illuminating the broader implications of strategy, trust, and familial duty. Now, imagine for a moment being inside the palace during these revelations. The tension is palpable. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every moment of silence carries weight. Anne's disclosures are like ripples across a still pond, disturbing the surface of centuries-old traditions. The emotional resonance is immediate. Shock, disbelief, and the subtle acknowledgement of betrayal blend in a complex tapestry of royal dynamics. And while the public sees headlines and hears sound bites, the true impact of Anne's revelations reverberates through the corridors of power, through the hearts of those involved, and through the collective consciousness of a global audience captivated by the unfolding drama. But this is only the beginning. Anne's revelations are just the first thread in a tapestry that will unravel shocking truths about strategy, manipulation, and betrayal at the highest levels. There are letters yet to be revealed, private conversations yet to be exposed, and decisions yet to be understood in the context of long-term planning. Every step Harry and Meghan took, every interview, every deal, every public gesture must now be re-examined through the lens of premeditation and strategy. And, standing firmly in the eye of this storm, has the clarity, the courage, and the evidence to change the narrative forever. So, as we prepare to dive deeper into this story, ask yourself, what would you do if someone you trusted, someone you considered family, was playing a calculated game that could shape global perception? Would you confront them? Would you remain silent? Or would you wait, gather evidence, and strike when the moment is right? Princess and Story is not just about Harry and Meghan. It is about trust, strategy, and the enduring consequences of choices made behind closed doors. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Not all leaks are accidental. Some are deliberate, precise, and calculated. And as Princess Anne watched from the sidelines, she began to notice patterns in Harry's actions, subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but unmistakable once pieced together. The quiet before the storm wasn't just calm. It was preparation, it was testing the waters, and it was hiding a strategy that would eventually upend the royal family's world. Imagine the palace corridors, normally hushed and orderly, suddenly brimming with tension. Servants whispering in corners, security staff exchanging cautious glances, and the portraits of monarchs passed seemingly watching as the tension thickened. And, ever vigilant, notice details most would miss. A casually dropped remark in a private lunch. A fleeting text to a close insider. A seemingly innocuous question that, on the surface, seemed like curiosity but underneath hinted at orchestration. Every moment was part of a pattern, a prelude to the chaos that would explode months later in front of the cameras. Anne's first inkling that something larger was unfolding didn't come from public drama. It came from observation. She was meticulous by nature, and she had learned early that not everything a royal says is what it appears to be. Over time, small behaviors accumulated into a trail of breadcrumbs, each leading to a revelation more unsettling than the last. Harry's late-night calls, the sudden surge of interest in certain palace routines, the occasional offhand comment to aides. All were signals that someone outside the family might be carefully controlling the narrative, and began to ask herself, was Harry truly reacting to circumstances, or was he orchestrating them? The answer, as Anne would discover, was far more shocking than she could have imagined. Harry had been quietly crafting a path, each step designed to protect his own interests while creating a story for the world. But how did he manage it without detection? By exploiting trust, by knowing exactly whom to involve and whom to exclude, by carefully planting information and watching the reactions it produced. The public saw a heartbroken prince, a victim of an unforgiving institution, and saw strategy, foresight, and precision, a blueprint for a grand narrative designed for maximum impact. Consider for a moment the timeline. Months before the infamous Oprah interview, certain details had already surfaced in subtle ways. Stories leaked to journalists, conversations casually overheard by insiders, and the careful shaping of public opinion, all pointing toward an intentional release of information, and began cataloging these moments, cross-referencing them with events at the palace. It became clear what everyone assumed was reactionary behavior was, in fact, carefully staged strategy. Anne's position was unique. As a senior member of the royal family, she had access to private letters, personal conversations, and confidential briefings. She could see the pieces that others could only speculate about, and what she saw was disturbing. There were early communications, private notes, and hints that Harry had already formed a narrative months before the public knew anything. Small details, like conversations about family dynamics, which were later mirrored almost verbatim in the Oprah interview, made it impossible to ignore the calculated nature of the actions. This wasn't spontaneous emotion, it was deliberate planning. The stakes were enormous. Harry's narrative had the potential to shape public perception, to influence media coverage, and to redefine the monarchy in the eyes of the world. Every leaked detail, every orchestrated photo, every public statement served as a building block for a larger strategy, and understood the implications. If these actions were discovered, they could undermine trust within the family and destabilize centuries of tradition. Yet Harry's moves were subtle enough to fly under the radar, at least initially. He had mastered the art of appearing reactive while being entirely proactive. Anne's frustration grew as she pieced together the puzzle. How could a family member, someone she had raised alongside William and Charles, manipulate events on a global stage while presenting a narrative of victimhood? The answer lay in observation, patience, and discipline. Harry had learned from the media, from advisors, and perhaps even from past royal controversies. He knew how to craft a story, how to seed it carefully, and how to create maximum emotional resonance. Anne, with her keen analytical mind, began to see the threads connecting his actions, a carefully woven strategy designed to produce a precise reaction from both the family and the public. But what about Meghan? She was undeniably part of the picture, though, and initially focused on Harry's maneuvers. Meghan's influence, however, became clearer over time. Every public appearance, every interview, every seemingly spontaneous gesture contributed to the larger narrative, and noted patterns in their coordination, the way certain details were emphasized while others were carefully omitted. The puzzle pieces fit together too neatly to be coincidental. And also considered the palace culture. The monarchy operates on secrecy, discretion, and hierarchy. For someone to manipulate events while maintaining appearances required not only strategy, but an understanding of the institution itself. Harry had both, and realized that the quiet before the storm, the months of seemingly minor events, was anything but quiet. It was a preparatory phase, a testing ground, a rehearsal for the drama that would later captivate millions worldwide. As she observed, and began to anticipate the fallout, she could foresee how media outlets would interpret every word, how journalists would dissect interviews, and how the public would respond to carefully curated revelations. She saw the dominoes falling before they even tipped, and yet, she also recognized the human cost. Relationships were strained, trust was eroded, and familial bonds were tested in ways that would leave lasting scars. The calculated strategy might have succeeded in controlling a narrative, but it came at the expense of genuine connection. Anne's perspective was informed not just by observation, but by her experience. She had navigated palace intrigue, media scrutiny, and family dynamics for decades. She knew the difference between genuine reaction and orchestrated maneuvering, and the evidence she uncovered confirmed her suspicions. Harry had been planning, intentionally and strategically, every move that would later shock the world. The realization was both empowering and devastating. She had clarity, but it came with the burden of truth. And yet, even with all the evidence, Anne remained composed. She did not act impulsively. She waited, she documented, she prepared. The palace, with its centuries-old traditions and protocols, would not easily absorb such revelations, and understood that timing was crucial. To reveal too much too soon could backfire, but to remain silent risked letting the narrative spiral out of control. Her patience, analytical skills, and keen insight positioned her uniquely to confront the unfolding situation with authority. Now, consider the broader implications. If Harry had been leaking details and shaping narratives long before the Oprah interview, what does this say about the authenticity of his public persona? Was he genuinely reacting to a rigid institution, or was he carefully manipulating events to produce a desired outcome? Anne's discoveries force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about this saga. The public, captivated by tearful interviews and dramatic revelations, may have only seen a carefully curated performance. The quiet before the storm, as Anne came to understand, was a period of strategic preparation. Every gesture, every comment, every leak was part of a deliberate sequence designed to achieve specific outcomes. And, with her experience and insight, recognized the stakes. She also understood that the consequences of these actions extended far beyond the palace walls. Public perception, media narratives, and familial relationships would all be profoundly affected by the revelation of these strategies. Anne's observations also revealed contradictions that were impossible to ignore. Public statements painted one picture, while private actions told another. Harry and Meghan, portrayed as victims of a rigid and unyielding institution, were simultaneously architects of a narrative that exploited that institution for personal and public gain. The juxtaposition was striking, and saw through the veneer of emotion and performed vulnerability, recognizing the strategic calculus at play. By the end of this quiet period, Anne had amassed a compelling body of evidence. Letters, private communications, and testimonies created a mosaic of calculated action. She saw the orchestration of events not as isolated incidents, but as interconnected steps in a carefully planned sequence. And she realized that revealing this would not only expose Harry's strategy, but also reshape the narrative surrounding the Sussexes' public journey. And knew one thing with absolute certainty. The world had not yet seen the full extent of what had been planned. Every media story, every viral moment, every public outburst was only a fragment of the carefully constructed strategy. The palace, the family, and the public had only glimpsed the surface. The truth, as Anne would reveal, was far more complex, calculated, and deliberate than anyone could have imagined. And so, the quiet before the storm became a stage for preparation, observation, and revelation. Anne's patient documentation, analytical mind, and unwavering commitment to truth set the stage for what would come next. She was ready to step forward, to reveal the evidence, and to confront the narrative that had captivated the world. But what came next would change everything. And there are moments in life when the truth hits with a force so undeniable that it cannot be ignored. For Princess Anne, that moment came in the form of letters, notes, and whispered confirmations. Evidence so precise, so damning, that it would shock anyone who assumed Harry's narrative was spontaneous. And had always been known for her composure, her precision, and her dedication to duty. But as she reviewed the collection of documents and testimonies she had amassed, a chill ran down her spine. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was proof. Harry had been leaking details about William, the palace, and private family matters long before any public interviews. And these leaks weren't random. They were carefully timed, strategically placed, designed to control the story before the world even knew it existed. And remembered the first letter she found, tucked away in an archive she had rarely accessed. It was a seemingly innocuous communication between Harry and a trusted aide, written months before the Oprah interview. On the surface, it appeared to be a routine correspondence. But Anne, with her years of experience, noticed subtle markers, coded language, deliberate phrasing, hints of narrative framing. The letter spoke of managing perceptions, preparing for eventual disclosure, and timing the story for maximum impact. Each line, each word, was carefully chosen. Anne's first thought was disbelief. How could someone she knew so well, a brother she had raised alongside William, plan such a detailed strategy under the guise of vulnerability? But the deeper she dug, the more she realized this was not an isolated incident. Other documents, emails, and even private notes began to form a pattern. Conversations with aides, private consultations with media advisors, and subtle gestures all pointed toward a premeditated approach. Every revelation in the public domain, every tear, every confession, now appeared to and as a move in a carefully constructed game. Harry was not reacting, he was orchestrating, and the audacity of it was breathtaking. Anne's discovery was not just about letters or emails, it was about timing. She pieced together the sequence of events, mapping out when information was planted, when it would leak, and how it would be framed in media narratives. It became clear that the infamous Oprah interview was not a spontaneous act of catharsis, but the culmination of a strategy that had been in motion for months, perhaps even years. Each question, each pause, each emotional revelation had been meticulously planned, and could see the chessboard, and Harry's moves were precise, calculated, and intentional. The evidence also revealed something even more shocking. The leaks were targeted. Certain details about William, the palace hierarchy, and internal family dynamics were shared selectively, ensuring that the public narrative would align with Harry and Meghan's objectives. Some aides were inadvertently complicit, unknowingly spreading pieces of the story, while others were carefully guided, ensuring the narrative flowed as intended. Anne's realization was profound. This was not just about public perception, it was about control. Harry had sought to control the narrative, the timing, and the reactions of both the palace and the world, and also confronted the emotional weight of this revelation. As someone who had always valued transparency and honesty within the family, understanding that her brother had orchestrated such a campaign was a blow. There was betrayal, not just against the institution, but against the trust that binds a family together. She felt the complexity of her position. She could expose the truth, but doing so would also reveal fissures within the family, strains that might never heal. She knew that speaking out was both necessary and dangerous. Every word, every disclosure carried consequences. But the deeper and delved, the more connections emerged. One note hinted at a media briefing where certain facts were to be prepared for early release. Another referenced a discussion with a PR strategist about controlling the narrative around key family members. These were not casual conversations. These were strategic discussions, planning moves that would later play out on the global stage. And began to see a timeline emerging, one where each event, each interview, and each revelation was a deliberate step in a larger plan. The precision of it was staggering and disturbing. Anne's revelation also shed light on Meghan's role in the orchestration. While Harry may have been the primary architect, Meghan's presence was integral to the strategy. The emails and notes suggested careful coordination, hints at public image management, and guidance on what stories to emphasize, and could see how Meghan's influence had shaped the narrative, ensuring that the emotional resonance would be maximized. This was not simply a tale of one sibling's strategic moves. It was a coordinated effort, a partnership in narrative control. The implications of Anne's findings were enormous. Not only did they suggest premeditation, but they also challenged the authenticity of every public statement Harry had made. Each tearful confession, each heartfelt moment, each claim of suffering at the hands of the institution now carried a different weight. The strategy, now visible, reframed these moments. They were not purely emotional, they were tactical. Ann's evidence suggested that the public had been witnessing the execution of a plan, not the spontaneous fallout of family conflict. And yet, Ann's approach was careful. She did not rush to judgment, nor did she act impulsively. She knew the power of the evidence, the delicacy of the family dynamics, and the scrutiny of the public eye. Every document was verified, every conversation corroborated, every timeline double-checked. Her patience, discipline, and analytical rigor ensured that when she eventually revealed the truth, it would be undeniable. She was not acting out of spite or revenge. She was acting in the interest of clarity, truth, and accountability. The palace, with its centuries of tradition and hierarchy, was unprepared for such revelations. Ann's calm, deliberate approach contrasted sharply with the drama that would later unfold publicly. She had seen the storm coming. She had gathered the proof, and she had positioned herself to confront it with authority. And when the evidence was finally presented, the reactions were immediate: disbelief, shock, anger, and a sense of betrayal that rippled through the corridors of power. But it wasn't just the palace that would feel the impact. The global audience, who had followed Harry and Meghan's story with fascination, would soon be forced to reconsider their perception. Every headline, every viral clip, every social media debate was about to be reframed in light of Ann's revelations. The narrative of victimhood, rebellion, and courage was now juxtaposed against a narrative of strategy, premeditation, and manipulation. Ann's evidence forced a reckoning. The public would have to reconcile the emotional journey they witnessed with the tactical maneuvers that orchestrated it, and also recognize the personal toll. The revelation of premeditated leaks was not merely a professional or public issue. It was deeply personal. How do you process the knowledge that a family member you love, respect, and have supported may have strategically manipulated circumstances for personal gain? The emotions were complex: sorrow, anger, disappointment, and even a sense of awe at the precision of the strategy. Ann's patience and composure allowed her to navigate this complexity, but the weight of the truth was heavy. As Anne prepared to speak, she understood the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. This was not just evidence of planning, it was proof of intention. Harry had not acted impulsively, he had acted strategically. The revelations would shake the family, challenge public perception, and ignite debates around loyalty, trust, and the nature of personal narrative. Every detail and disclosed would carry weight, every nuance would be scrutinized, and every consequence would be far-reaching. The anticipation built to a crescendo, and, poised and determined, knew that once the evidence was made public, there would be no turning back. The storm that had been quietly gathering in the months leading up to the Oprah interview was about to break in full force. The palace, the public, and Harry and Meghan themselves would have to confront the truth. What had been portrayed as reactionary behavior was, in fact, a carefully executed strategy. And Anne, standing at the center of this revelation, was the one holding the pieces of the puzzle that could finally tell the full story. And so, as she stepped forward to reveal the evidence, the world waited, unaware of the depth and precision of the strategy that had been unfolding all along. What Anne uncovered would shock everyone, not just because of the details themselves, but because it reframed the entire narrative. What appeared to be impulsive, emotional reactions were, in reality, meticulously planned moves on a global chessboard. And the question that everyone would soon ask is, what else has been carefully orchestrated behind the palace walls, hidden from the public eye? But what came next? The revelation that would expose not just strategy but intent, not just planning but premeditation, would change everything. And no one saw it coming. When a story is being carefully orchestrated, nothing is accidental. And the Netflix deal was no exception. To the public, it seemed like a simple contract. Harry and Meghan signing on for documentaries and series, a couple sharing their stories in their own words. But Princess Anne saw through the surface glamour. She recognized the signs of strategy, of premeditation, of calculated storytelling designed to control narrative and perception long before a single camera rolled. The Netflix connection was more than a business move. It was a masterstroke in strategic planning, a move designed to influence perception globally, and Anne's insight into it would shock everyone. Anne's discovery began with the timeline. Months, even years, before headlines declared the $100 million Netflix deal, subtle signals suggested preparation. Conversations, private memos, and insider accounts hinted at negotiations that were far more sophisticated than public knowledge. Harry wasn't simply reacting to frustration with the monarchy or media scrutiny. He was building infrastructure for a story he intended to tell on a global stage. Every step of the Netflix deal, from initial discussions to contract clauses, was designed not just for profit, but for control of the narrative. Imagine the implications. The world thought they were watching a couple reveal their struggles candidly. What and saw was an intricate choreography. Strategic leaks, pre-planned emotional beats, and deliberate shaping of public opinion. Each detail of the deal, the documentaries, the interviews, the carefully chosen directors, was orchestrated to align with Harry and Meghan's long-term objectives. And behind the scenes, and began connecting dots that revealed the full scope of their plan. The evidence was staggering. Private correspondence revealed discussions about timing, when the deal should be announced, how it would coincide with public events, and how the media would likely respond. There were references to framing the narrative, preparing for public scrutiny, and controlling the story from the outset. And noted the precision in these documents. This wasn't casual planning. It was deliberate, targeted strategy. The Netflix deal wasn't just a financial opportunity. It was a mechanism to shape public perception on a scale unprecedented in royal history. And also noticed the psychological tactics embedded in the deal. Interviews would not be spontaneous, but carefully scripted, emotional arcs planned to maximize impact, and timing aligned with global media cycles. The stories weren't just personal. They were designed to create empathy, to position Harry and Meghan as sympathetic figures while subtly framing the monarchy in a less favorable light. Every clip, every statement, every carefully chosen detail was part of a larger strategy. A strategy and could now see with startling clarity. The interplay between Netflix and media exposure was particularly revealing, and discovered that certain leaks, which seemed coincidental, were in fact coordinated with the production timelines. Stories appeared in newspapers, social media, and talk shows that mirrored points later highlighted in Netflix productions. The parallels were undeniable. Harry and Meghan were not simply engaging with media opportunistically. They were constructing a narrative architecture that controlled public perception, guiding audiences' emotional response from multiple angles. And yet, this strategic planning carried personal consequences, and recognized the subtle betrayals, the strain on familial relationships, and the manipulation of trust. Harry was not just shaping a public story. He was simultaneously controlling how information reached his own family. Selective disclosures, private warnings, and strategic omissions ensured that the palace remained unaware of the full scope of the plan until the moment of execution, and realized that what appeared to be spontaneous family fallout was, in reality, a calculated release designed to catch the palace off guard. The financial aspect of the deal was also revealing. Beyond the headlines of lucrative contracts, the negotiation process itself indicated careful orchestration. Anne's investigation showed discussions that prioritized not just profit, but global influence and narrative control. There were clauses about content approval, strategic release dates, and messaging alignment, all tools for guiding public perception. Harry and Meghan were not merely negotiating a contract. They were constructing a mechanism to manage and manipulate information flow on a massive scale. Anne's perspective was sharpened by her understanding of timing and narrative impact. She saw how the Netflix deal was aligned with major public events, the Queen's Jubilee, public appearances by other royals, and strategically timed announcements. Each element was designed to maximize attention and shape the interpretation of events. In her experience, few moves were as deliberate or as impactful as this. She realized that the couple had effectively created a platform for their story that ensured global attention, emotional resonance, and strategic advantage. And then there was the internal palace reaction, or lack thereof, and discovered that key palace figures were kept unaware of the timeline, the scope, and the implications of the Netflix deal until the public announcement. The secrecy wasn't incidental. It was intentional, a tactical move to prevent interference and maintain control over the narrative. The palace was blindsided not just by the announcement, but by the carefully timed leaks that preceded it. Anne's revelations would later confirm that the so-called surprise deal was anything but. Every moment had been meticulously planned. and also noted the subtle interplay between Harry and Meghan in executing this plan. While Harry may have initiated certain elements, Meghan's influence shaped the presentation, the narrative focus, and the emotional resonance. Documents suggested collaboration in determining which stories would be highlighted, which details would remain private, and how public perception could be guided, and recognized the sophistication of this coordination. It was not the work of two amateurs, but of individuals acutely aware of narrative power, media influence, and emotional manipulation. As the pieces fell into place and realized the broader significance, the Netflix deal wasn't just a contract. It was a tactical tool, a way to rewrite history, influence global opinion, and challenge institutional authority. By examining the evidence, she could see how the strategy unfolded in real time. Leaks timed to coincide with production schedules, media narratives pre-shaped to maximize impact, and carefully scripted moments designed to evoke sympathy. Every detail pointed to a premeditated strategy aimed at achieving multiple objectives simultaneously, and also understood the stakes for the monarchy. The deal, once executed, would position Harry and Meghan as independent voices, capable of shaping narratives without palace oversight. It challenged the authority of traditional structures and created a new model of influence, one that leveraged emotional storytelling, strategic timing, and global media platforms. Anne's revelation highlighted not just strategic planning, but also the potential consequences for trust, authority, and familial loyalty. The complexity of the situation deepened as an uncovered evidence of contingency planning. There were references to potential backlash, anticipated media responses, and strategies to mitigate negative reactions. Harry and Meghan had not only planned the public-facing narrative, they had anticipated potential criticism and built mechanisms to control damage, and realized that the couple had effectively created a multi-layered strategy, combining timing, media influence, and emotional storytelling to achieve maximum impact with minimal exposure of their own vulnerabilities. And yet, even with all this evidence, Anne maintained her composure. She knew that revealing this information required precision, clarity, and patience. The stakes were monumental. Public perception, family dynamics, and institutional credibility all hung in the balance. By carefully analyzing the Netflix connection, Anne was able to reconstruct a timeline that demonstrated intent, strategy, and premeditation, proof that the seemingly spontaneous fallout was actually the result of meticulous planning. The Netflix deal, as Anne revealed, was a turning point. It transformed what the public perceived as candid storytelling into a strategic campaign, aligning financial gain, narrative control, and emotional impact. Anne's revelations reframed the entire saga. Harry and Meghan's actions were not reactive. They were deliberate, calculated, and strategic. And the implications extended far beyond personal reputation. They threatened to reshape public understanding of the monarchy itself. By the time Anne completed her review, the picture was clear. Every detail of the Netflix deal, every carefully orchestrated interview, every emotional revelation was part of a broader strategy. Harry and Meghan had executed a plan with precision, leveraging media, timing, and public perception to their advantage. Anne's evidence confirmed what many suspected but could not prove. The story that captivated the world was not accidental. It was calculated. But what came next? The connections between the Netflix deal and the infamous Oprah interview would push the story even further, revealing a level of strategy, intent, and premeditation that no one had anticipated. The storm was gathering, and Princess Anne was standing at the center of it, ready to reveal the truth. When the world watched the Oprah interview unfold, millions gasped at the revelations, sympathized with the tears, and debated the heartbreak. But Princess Anne, standing behind the veil of palace discretion, saw something entirely different. A meticulously orchestrated leak, a premeditated narrative designed to shape perception long before the cameras ever rolled. What appeared to be raw emotion and spontaneous confession was, in reality, the culmination of months of strategy, a strategy Harry had been executing with surgical precision, and first became aware of the leak's magnitude through a series of insider communications. Certain aides noticed that fragments of the interview's content had already been circulating, details that were not yet public but had been seeded carefully into trusted channels. At first, it seemed like gossip, casual talk that inevitably escaped into the press. But as and cross-referenced these snippets with Harry's private communications and preparatory notes, a startling pattern emerged. The interview was no accident, and the leaks were part of a calculated plan. The evidence revealed layers of orchestration. Some details had been shared months earlier with journalists under conditions of anonymity. Others were subtly hinted at in off-the-record meetings with trusted allies. Even private comments made to friends in confidence had a way of reaching the public in precisely timed intervals, each one aligning with the eventual content of the Oprah interview. And, reviewing these timelines, could see how every piece was carefully positioned to ensure maximum impact. It was as if Harry was testing the waters, planting seeds of narrative, and then watching them grow before releasing the full story to the world. And shock was not merely about the leaks themselves. It was about the premeditation. Every public revelation, every tear, every intimate confession that audiences worldwide consumed as spontaneous and heartfelt was already part of a structured timeline. Harry had not been reacting to his circumstances. He had been setting the stage for months. His words, emotions, and revelations were carefully timed for maximum audience engagement. What millions perceived as authenticity was, and realized, tactical precision. The intricacy of the orchestration became even clearer when and analyzed communications between Harry and Meghan in the months leading up to the interview. There were documents outlining talking points, lists of issues to emphasize, and subtle suggestions about phrasing that would resonate emotionally with the global audience. The couple had, in effect, created a blueprint for public perception, anticipating reactions from media outlets, royal aides, and, crucially, the public, and could see the strategy forming piece by piece. Every leak, every carefully framed narrative, every preemptive move had been executed in anticipation of the Oprah interview, and also discovered the careful timing of leaks relative to media coverage. Strategic pieces of information had been released to trusted outlets before the broadcast to generate buzz and build expectation. The narrative was seeded gradually, ensuring that the interview would hit at the apex of public attention, creating maximum emotional impact and reinforcing the perception of spontaneity. From Anne's perspective, the world had been watching the execution of a calculated plan masquerading as candid confession. The leak wasn't just about content, it was about influence. Harry had understood that shaping perception required more than words. It required controlling the emotional arc. Certain revelations were timed to provoke empathy, others designed to create tension, and still others intended to spark outrage. By strategically releasing fragments ahead of time, Harry and Meghan ensured that the public would consume the full interview through a lens of anticipation, heightened by prior exposure to selective details. And, seeing this pattern, could not help but marvel at the scale of planning involved, even as she felt the sting of betrayal that a family member would orchestrate such a scheme. Anne's investigation also revealed the network behind the leaks. Trusted aides, media insiders, and even palace consultants had, willingly or unknowingly, contributed to the controlled narrative. Emails and notes showed instructions on what could be shared and what must remain confidential. The orchestration was so thorough that it created the illusion of spontaneity while maintaining absolute control over the story. Every detail, from private grievances to personal anecdotes, was placed in a way that ensured resonance, timing, and emotional engagement with the audience. What made Anne's revelation particularly shocking was the level of precision. The leaks were not scattershot or haphazard. They were carefully aligned with the public interview structure. She identified instances where small, seemingly insignificant pieces of information planted months earlier appeared verbatim in the broadcast. It became clear that Harry had been scripting reality in real life, using the leaks to build momentum for the narrative he intended to deliver on screen. What the public assumed were unguarded moments of vulnerability were, in fact, the results of meticulous planning, and also examined the psychological impact of the leaks. By releasing information in increments, Harry created an environment where anticipation and curiosity amplified the effect of the final interview. When the broadcast finally aired, the audience was primed to react emotionally, having already been exposed to fragments of the narrative, and recognized this as a sophisticated media tactic, preparation designed to maximize engagement, sympathy, and narrative control. she realized that the entire episode was less about revelation than about execution. The scale of orchestration extended to global media, and discovered that briefings had been scheduled with international outlets, ensuring synchronized coverage across continents. The leaks generated preliminary discussions, online debates, and social media chatter, all of which heightened attention for the eventual interview. From Anne's perspective, this was a strategic chess game. Each leak a calculated move to shape perception, every piece timed to produce optimal impact. The public, unaware of this orchestration, believed they were witnessing spontaneous emotional honesty, while the reality was a meticulously crafted plan. Anne's personal reaction to the leaks was complicated. As a senior royal, she understood the media's power, but she had never encountered planning of this magnitude within the family. The intentionality of Harry's actions, the precision of timing, and the strategic framing were unprecedented. For Anne, it was both a revelation and a warning. The consequences of premeditated leaks could destabilize family trust, alter public perception, and leave lasting damage to both relationships and institutional reputation. Yet, Anne also recognized the human dimension. Behind the strategy was her brother, navigating complex emotions, pressures, and loyalties. The leaks were not purely tactical. They were entwined with personal grievances, aspirations, and a desire for independence. This duality, the blend of strategy and emotion, made the situation profoundly complex, and understood that confronting the leaks would require balancing truth with empathy, accountability with discretion, and exposure with respect for the family. The revelations extended beyond the content itself, and noted that the leaks anticipated specific public reactions, from media outrage to social commentary. The timing, phrasing, and framing of each leak were carefully aligned to manipulate perception, create anticipation, and guide narrative interpretation. The interview was not just a broadcast. It was the culmination of a meticulously engineered campaign that had been years in the making. Anne's investigation confirmed that what appeared as reactive disclosure was, in fact, proactive orchestration, and also documented the interplay between Harry and Meghan in this process. Meghan's involvement in shaping the narrative, advising on timing, and managing responses was evident. Their partnership was not just romantic or supportive, it was strategic. Every statement, every detail, and every emotional beat had been coordinated to maximize impact. Anne's findings revealed a sophisticated orchestration, a collaborative effort that combined emotional storytelling, timing, and media manipulation to achieve precise outcomes. As the evidence became undeniable, Anne realized the gravity of what she was about to reveal. The leaks, the anticipation, the framing, all demonstrated premeditation, strategy, and intent. Harry and Meghan had controlled perception from multiple angles, using leaks to prime the public and shape narrative interpretation. What the world had assumed was spontaneous confession was, in truth, the execution of a well-crafted plan. And the consequences of this revelation were staggering. For the palace, it meant that trust had been manipulated and family dynamics carefully exploited. For the public, it reframed every headline, every viral clip, and every debate surrounding Harry and Meghan's narrative. The Oprah interview, long celebrated as a moment of raw honesty, was now exposed as the result of careful planning, strategic timing, and deliberate manipulation. Anne's revelations would alter perception, challenge assumptions, and ignite debates that extended far beyond palace walls. But what came next? The final connections between the premeditated leaks, the strategic timing of the Netflix deal, and the carefully scripted public narrative would leave the royal family reeling, and stood poised, evidence in hand, ready to expose a level of premeditation and strategic execution no one had anticipated. The storm was no longer quiet, and the world was about to witness the full scale of Harry and Meghan's orchestrated narrative. This wasn't fallout. It was strategy. Those words would come to define Princess Anne's perspective as she pieced together the unfolding drama. The world assumed that Harry and Meghan's media storm, the tearful interviews, the candid Netflix productions, the viral headlines, was spontaneous, a natural reaction to palace pressures and family conflict. But Anne, with her unique insight and access, saw the hidden architecture behind every move. The truth was far more calculated. Every emotional disclosure had been planned, every leak timed, every media interaction orchestrated. What looked like fallout was, in fact, a carefully executed strategy, and began to see the patterns after reviewing private communications, documents, and insider testimonies. Details that should have appeared isolated, an interview snippet, a leaked email, a subtly timed public appearance, were, in reality, sequential and intentional. Every leak reinforced the narrative she had already detected through the Netflix deal and the Oprah interview planning. What was presented as an unplanned response to palace tension was, and realized, a deliberate sequence of events, a domino effect designed to manipulate perception and control narrative. At the heart of Anne's revelation was timing. The leaks were meticulously coordinated with major milestones, family engagements, media announcements, and royal events. Each moment had a purpose. Some leaks were subtle, meant only for internal palace awareness, while others were calculated to leak externally and create controlled media buzz, and noted that the timing of these leaks often preceded major public disclosures, ensuring that Harry and Meghan's narrative would reach audiences with maximum emotional impact. This was strategic precision on a scale rarely seen in modern royal history. The evidence was striking, and uncovered private messages that indicated forethought, planning, and anticipation of reactions. One note suggested discussing potential questions and preparing responses in advance to guide media coverage. Another outlined which details should be emphasized and which should be withheld. These were not casual considerations. They were strategic decisions executed with deliberate intent, and recognized that what the public perceived as reactive, emotionally charged disclosures were, in reality, proactive steps in a larger plan, and also had to reconcile this strategy with the apparent emotional authenticity displayed by Harry and Meghan. How could a calculated plan appear so raw, so heartfelt, so spontaneous to viewers? That, she realized, was the genius of the orchestration. The narrative was engineered to evoke empathy while masking intent. The leaks and media interactions created a narrative arc designed to manipulate perception, generate emotional engagement, and position the couple as sympathetic figures navigating a rigid, unyielding institution. Every performance, every tear, every dramatic pause served a calculated purpose. The palace itself was, by design, left in the dark, and discovered evidence indicating that key figures were intentionally excluded from certain communications. This ensured that the leaks and media strategy could proceed without interference. The careful isolation of information allowed Harry and Meghan to control the timing, framing, and interpretation of their story, and recognized that this was more than just a PR campaign. It was a sophisticated orchestration of influence and perception executed from within the family itself. One particularly damning revelation came from insider testimony regarding preparatory briefings. Staff reported receiving instructions on how to handle questions, which anecdotes could be shared and which should be minimized. The briefings mirrored the structure of the eventual Oprah interview and Netflix productions, and noted the deliberate synchronization of these preparatory steps with subsequent public appearances, revealing an intricate web of planning designed to maximize both emotional resonance and narrative control. Anne's insight extended to the psychological dimensions of the strategy. The leaks were designed to shape public perception in stages, building anticipation and emotional investment. By gradually revealing information, Harry and Meghan primed audiences to receive the interviews with heightened empathy. Each leak served as a psychological cue, guiding public interpretation and reinforcing the desired narrative, and realized that this level of orchestration required not only foresight, but an acute understanding of media influence and human psychology. The strategy also leveraged relationships within and outside the palace. Certain aides and friends, knowingly or unknowingly, facilitated the plan by sharing selective information or influencing media perception. The coordination of these allies ensured that narrative control extended beyond private communications into public discourse, and recognized the tactical brilliance, but also the personal betrayal. Those closest to Harry had unwittingly, or perhaps willingly, become instruments in a strategy that manipulated family, institution, and public alike. Anne's perspective was further sharpened by the inconsistencies she noted between public statements and private communications. Publicly, Harry appeared to be reacting to systemic injustices and familial pressures. Privately, however, documents indicated careful planning, selective information sharing, and deliberate shaping of outcomes. The contradictions were stark and undeniable. What was presented as emotional fallout was, in fact, calculated maneuvering. Yet Anne's assessment went beyond mere strategy. It delved into motive. Why would Harry and Meghan orchestrate such a comprehensive plan? The evidence suggested multiple objectives: shaping public perception, securing media platforms, managing personal and professional narratives, and exerting influence over global discourse. Each leak, interview, and production was a step toward achieving these goals, and recognized that understanding motive was crucial, not only to grasp the strategy's intent, but to anticipate future actions. The interplay between strategy and perception was particularly revealing, and noted that media coverage often amplified the impact of each leak, reinforcing the narrative Harry and Meghan intended to project. By strategically releasing information and controlling timing, they created an environment where public interpretation aligned with their objectives, and understood that this orchestration was a sophisticated manipulation of narrative, influence, and perception, a calculated campaign masquerading as reactive emotion. The evidence also revealed a long-term vision. Documents indicated foresight in planning not only immediate disclosures, but also subsequent actions, interviews, and media interactions, and could see that Harry and Meghan were constructing a multi-phase strategy designed to sustain public engagement, influence opinion, and maintain control over narrative for months, perhaps years. The plan was not impulsive. It was deliberate, thoughtful, and precise, and also considered the impact on family dynamics. By strategically controlling leaks and media narratives, Harry and Meghan created tensions within the palace, placing key figures in reactive positions while maintaining their own narrative dominance. This manipulation of relationships was subtle yet effective, highlighting a calculated understanding of both human behavior and institutional structures, and realized that the fallout perceived publicly was, in fact, an orchestrated maneuver designed to position the couple advantageously while challenging the monarchy's authority. Amid the revelations, Anne's personal feelings were complex. She felt betrayal, yes, but also a sense of awe at the meticulousness of the plan. She recognized the precision, the foresight, and the audacity involved in orchestrating such a comprehensive strategy. Yet she also understood the consequences: strained family bonds, institutional tension, and public scrutiny that would reverberate for years. Anne's judgment was clear. Truth had to be acknowledged, but exposure would carry heavy repercussions. The final layer of the strategy became apparent when Anne analyzed the alignment between leaks and global media response. Social media discussions, news cycles, and commentary patterns all appeared to follow the trajectory Harry and Meghan anticipated. The careful timing of leaks created a feedback loop, reinforcing the narrative and amplifying emotional resonance, and realized that the couple had effectively engineered not just public awareness but public reaction, managing both the story and its reception with meticulous control, and concluded that what the world had perceived as fallout, the tearful interviews, emotional confessions, public outrage, was, in fact, a masterclass in strategic narrative execution. The leaks, timed for impact, positioned Harry and Meghan to achieve maximum influence over both media and public opinion. Every emotional beat, every carefully framed disclosure, every preemptive move was designed with precision. From Anne's perspective, the narrative was not reactive. It was intentional, orchestrated, and meticulously calculated. And yet, even with all this evidence, Anne knew the story was far from over. The Oprah interview was only one component of a broader strategy, one that intersected with Netflix productions, social media influence, and global media coverage. Every piece of the puzzle connected, revealing a level of premeditation and narrative control that few could comprehend. Anne's insight confirmed what many suspected but could not prove. Harry and Meghan's public journey had been guided by strategy, not just emotion. But what came next? The intersection of leaked narratives, premeditated timing, and the carefully scripted emotional arcs would reveal the full extent of the orchestration, and was ready to present evidence that would shock not just the public, but the royal family itself. The storm, carefully planned for months, was about to hit in full force. And no one would see it coming. There are certain objects that, when discovered, change everything. For Princess, and those objects were letters. Letters hidden in archives, letters tucked away in drawers, letters exchanged quietly between Harry and his confidants. They were ordinary at first glance, simple sheets of paper, sometimes handwritten, sometimes typed, but Anne, with her attention to detail and knowledge of palace nuance, recognized them immediately for what they were: evidence of planning, coordination, and strategy. The royal letters would reveal the truth behind what the public had perceived as spontaneous reaction, and they would shock the family in ways no one expected.